Hey everyone, it's me, Dave. Guess what we're talking about again? That's right, High Guardian Spice! I know you're so excited for that. One thing I've noticed in my Discord and across the platform of YouTube itself, people love this show so much that they're deciding to rewrite the entirety of it.
Mind if I got in?
But seriously though, all my videos on this have been pretty negative, so I was wondering if I could, try and fix it for the better. That sounds difficult, but it's possible? Maybe? However, the first issue that we run into is that when rewriting this show, people end up having to change so much that it doesn't even resemble the same product anymore. This show has issues that run down to its core. You have to uproot the entire thing if you want to truly fix every single problem within it. If you have to change so much that it doesn't even resemble the same product anymore, what's even the point? Just write a new story. So my goal here today is to try and fix as much of the show as possible while still leaving it at least somewhat similar to the original thing. Now that of course doesn't mean I won't be making some major changes because it's kind of necessary for this to make any sort of sense. But what I don't want is just a completely new story with a High Guardian Spice skin slapped on it. I'll try my best, but it might not even pan out. I'm not a miracle worker.
I can only polish a turd so much.
Now, I think the four major categories that need to be changed in order for this to work would have to be the Academy, the magic system, the villains, and last but not least, the characters. Let's get started with the biggest change I'm gonna make first. The reason why Guardians exist. In the original show, there isn't one, so we're gonna make one. Now this change is actually pretty simple, and it explains so much to the point where I'm surprised the writers didn't think of doing this in the first place. The purpose of the Guardians is to fight the rot. Instead of all the Guardians just being brain-dead morons who for some reason don't even notice when nature itself is dying around them, let's have their existence be tied to this rot problem. Now this does several things. Firstly, it gives every single main character a reason to fight the rot. If time wasn't there, I'm pretty sure none of the other main girls would even know that it exists. It also explains what the characters are training for, as the rot causes animals to turn into monstrosities that can cause serious harm to society. And last but not least, it drives the main story forward, as the rot problem is supposedly a huge issue that the main girls are supposed to deal with. There's also going to be a reason that the rot exists, but I'm going to be saving that for the villains section, so wait until we get there. For now, all you need to know is that the Guardians exist to fight the rot, and that's what everyone's training for. Now when it comes to the Academy itself, oh my lord, we're gonna have so many things to change. As I said in my video on the school system, this Academy is terrible. First things first, since the reason the Academy exists now is to fight the rot, we're going to be axing pretty much everything that doesn't have to do with that. That means no sacred languages, no everything hours, and I'm sorry to say it, but no barding. Slimeboy will probably not be in the school anymore. Now I know this is difficult, but trust me, it's for the better. He's probably best as just some side character they run into at a Terrasphere shop instead of an actual student at this academy. Also, on the note of axing people, Aster probably won't be in the academy either. We'll discuss that more in the character section. Also, I'm going to be axing the track system since the story basically ignores it anyway, so what's the point? So essentially, when the main girls first arrive, they're made aware that they need to fight the rot, and pretty much every class they take is going to involve fighting the rot, dealing with the monsters created by the rot, and also dealing with nature being destroyed, etc. Now, instead of having them do like live field exercises right away, I think it might be more interesting to have them do VR training, since yes, VR exists in this world, why not use it? I think this could make for a pretty interesting episode to just have the girls go through like a VR simulation of various environments and have them do their training in VR. Not only does it make sense to have them do this kind of training so they can be ready for different events, but it also doesn't put their lives in danger right away so they can fuck up without having it be life-threatening. Now, as demonstrated in the original show, the school really gives no fucks about its student body. They get injured all the time and the teachers just don't care. Now, I'm hoping to change that and make it so the school actually cares about its own students, because believe it or not, it's kind of difficult to have warriors do stuff if they die during the fucking training. So instead of just throwing the students into the hot seat right away, the first years can actually, go through some VR training and simpler stuff so they aren't at risk of dying. This also means the potions teacher has lost her poisoning students privilege. Now, I know I'm making the school sound more kind-hearted than the original show, but trust me, it's still gonna be dangerous. Being a guardian is a hard job, and you very likely could die if you're not ready. Because of this, I think it would be interesting if the school had a way of eliminating students that weren't up to the task. Like Aster, for example. What if we introduced him earlier, but then he just really sucked and he got eliminated, and that served as an omen for the other girls that they had to try really hard or they might get kicked out. The threat of being eliminated from the school because you don't cut it could be a thing that's looming over all of the girls for the entirety of this season. Imagine every once in a while there's a Survivor-style meeting where the triad has to pick who gets to stay and who has to go. That could be some very interesting drama indeed. Maybe instead of making this like a normal academy, it could be more like a military camp or something. That would be a lot more interesting than it just being, oh, magic school again. But at that point we might be dipping our toes into changing so much it's unrecognizable territory. There are many ways that you can fix this academy, but I think the two major things that need to be done is 1, the school needs to have a defined goal that they're working towards, and 2, the classes need to make a lot more sense for what they're doing. Instead of translating runes, they should be teaching you how to shoot lasers. On that subject, let's talk about the magic system, my favorite. This is also going to tie back into how we handle the academy a little bit, you'll see. If you've seen my video on the magic system, you know this shit is broken beyond belief. Now there are 2 ways we can deal with this. A, we can nerf it into the ground, or B, the more fun option, we can have everybody use magic and use it more effectively. Now the first option is a lot easier because nerfing the magic system would make it a lot easier to write for, but also I think it's more in the spirit of the show to have a ton of magic going around, so we have to try and find a way to make that work somehow. Now of course this doesn't mean that every spell gets to stay. The portals are the first to get axed, obviously. They're overpowered as fuck and they barely use them anyway, so why even have them? And following this, every single character is going to be using magic, including Rosemary and Parsley. I think it would be pretty interesting if all of their weapons were actually Terraspheres, so Rosemary could just have an orb that would transform into Flowering Thorn instead of it just being a normal sword. That would be a lot cooler. Have her fight more like Mandrake, summoning spectral weapons and shooting laser blasts at people. That would be way more interesting than what we have now. Now, of course, this does have the side effect of having all the girls be magic users and thus not having much diversity in their fighting styles, so instead I think we could have them all use different types of spells. Like for instance, Rosemary would favor ones that are more destructive, while Sage would probably focus on support, and Time would focus on, like creating trees and shit or whatever. You can get really creative with what kind of spells they decide to go for, but as long as they're differentiated in some way so the fights aren't all the same. I think it would be a lot better if they all brought something unique to the table that the others weren't skilled at. Now this is another reason why I decided to axe the track system, since it would make a lot more sense for them to be in the same class as if they're all magic users. But if we want to keep the conflict between Rosemary and Sage where they had to split up in episode 2, we could probably have them go through some different training for different schools of magic. Basic fantasy shit like destruction magic, conjuration, etc. If you go into a specialization, you get different classes at some points. That could be a lot more interesting than the original track system, which seems to be split up into usefuls and not usefuls. Either way you handle it, it's a lot better than what we got in the original. Now why don't we use a little transition magic to move on to the next segment? That being, of course, the villains. Now here I'm going to be divulging the major twist of the story, and it's one that I think the writers were going for. It's that Terraspheres are the thing that's causing the rot. Now I think what could separate old and new magic in my version is that old magic uses your energy, while new magic uses the planet's energy, which is why Terraspheres can output a lot more power than old magic can. This is ironic because the Guardians are actively trying to use Terraspheres to fight the rot, but what they don't know is that in using them, they're actually causing the problem to get even worse. So how does the Triumvirate tie into all of this? Well, what if they were the ones selling Terraspheres? The reason they don't want people to figure out why the rot is happening is because if they did, that would cut into their profits. Maybe the girls, through their exploits, find out that the rot is being caused by Terraspheres in some manner, and because of this, Olive is dispatched to make sure they don't talk. That's something that confused me in the original. Why the heck do they need to kill the girls? It's not like finding out that the rot exists is a problem, because if they don't know what's causing it, then it isn't really an issue. And they can't be the only ones looking into this. I mean, the rot is affecting the entirety of the Fairy Woods. Like, a ton of people were supposedly living there. The other changes I made to this story will also explain why the Triumvirate are spying on the Guardians to begin with. Since they're fighting the rot, they want to make sure that they don't catch on to anything. And they could also be selling Terraspheres to the Guardians to make even more money. Maybe the reason that Olive was sent to deal with them specifically was because Olive was the strongest scout on standby. She wasn't usually dispatched to kill people, but now that these girls have figured out they need to get rid of them quickly before they talk to anyone. I like Olive's arc of slowly switching sides. I know that's a little cliche, but I think it's still interesting. Maybe since she's just supposed to be a scout, the idea of killing someone has really set her off. Maybe the Triumvirate have been experimenting with magic to give people these powers to transform into various animals so they can be more effective scouts. So Olive could essentially be a brainwashed soldier used for their purposes. And the girls have to come together to free her using the power of friendship and also brutal violence. There's also Mandrake, who just comes in to be a dickhead and die. I mean, there's not really much to change there. He's just evil because evilness. I also think we should reveal that there are spies in the school way earlier. Like maybe in episode 3, the audience finds out that Olive is secretly a cat girl. Maybe Olive could be some kind of prankster who constantly screws with the girls just because she wants to do something exciting while she's doing these boring scouting missions. And perhaps she fucks up and reveals herself, which is why she's suddenly put in the hot seat. Whichever way you want to go, having the villain's goals tie into the rot and also the hero's goals tie into the rot brings everything together perfectly. And now we get to the segment that I've been dreading the fuck out of. The characters. Oh god, the characters. Now, Amaryllis and Snapdragon are fine, but everyone else, like, what do we even do?
To be honest, it's so stupid. I'm not even sure how to deal with this whole situation anymore.
Honestly, I kind of struggled with this because trying to find a way to make these characters interesting while also not completely changing everything they stand for and making them unrecognizable is very difficult. One thing I came up with is the idea of why they're going to this academy. Maybe Parsley's conflict, instead of her parents just wanting her to be home for housework, they actually want her to come home because being a guardian is dangerous. Perhaps most of the girls' families are not okay with them going to this academy because they might die, and that's an issue. How about in the first episode, instead of having Rosemary and Sage go to Lingarth, they spend the whole episode in their hometown of Pebble. They realize how boring their lives are and they really want something interesting to happen instead of just to live here, become farmers, and then die. Rosemary's mom was once a guardian and that led her to being missing, so her father probably doesn't want Rosemary to go through the same fate. And Sage's mother could have an issue with the Guardian's flagrant use of terraspheres because she feels like using magic at no cost might have some effect on the planet. Maybe she isn't fully sure that it's causing the rot, but she could have an inkling that something's off about it. So this means that both of their parents don't want them to go to the academy. So what do? They sneak out and go into it anyway without their parents' approval. Maybe we have a scene where Rosemary somehow convinces Sage to go to this academy with her, and Sage, against her better judgment, decides, you know what, this is my best friend, and if they're going to die, I should probably help them out a little. Now this is a lot more interesting, having these two characters sneak out against their parents' wishes to go to this academy where they're putting their own lives at risk to save others. And by the time their parents find out that they've done this and managed to track them down to Lingarth, they have already gone through training and are completely different from the people they used to be. Parsley and Thyme could also go through something similar, having to sneak into the academy because they want to fight the rot, or because Parsley wants to do something more interesting with their life as well. And also, I know I said Snapdragon was okay, but maybe we can add a little bit more to his backstory. Perhaps his father is forcing him to go to this academy and he really doesn't want to. He doesn't actually want to be a warrior, he's just being pressured by his family, and maybe he could just end up quitting. His character arc is figuring out that he doesn't have to let his parents decide everything for him and he can make his own decisions on who he wants to be. I think that basically communicates the same message that Snapdragon was trying to get across in the original, but you judge for yourself. And I also think while we're changing characters around, we can make Sage less of a petty, bigoted psycho.
I don't believe that guys are all awful. I mean, Hackberry Trout was okie, but he never tried to explain magic to me.
Yeah, I think we could have a lot less of that. Instead, I think what could attract Snapdragon to them is that they're both going through something similar, not really wanting to be there, but being there for someone else's sake. For Snapdragon, it's the fact that his father's forcing him to, and for Sage, it's the fact that Rosemary really wanted to come here, and so she was just kind of dragged along. This could also give Sage a better reason to snap at Rosemary in the later episodes. Maybe she's upset that she got dragged out here and thinks it was a mistake. It makes a lot more sense than her throwing a petty hissy fit because her friend didn't want to do some bullshit with pumpkins.
Oh, I put all our names in for the Flaming Axe Challenge.
Isn't that at the same time as the gourd carving contest? You saw me sign us up for it. It's like pumpkin carving, but using ancient tools and adhering to very specific regional guidelines.
I didn't see you choose that.
Now be honest with me, which argument would you rather see? Rosemary and Sage bickering over which Halloween event they want to go to, or Sage snapping at Rosemary for potentially ruining her life? Personally, I think one has a bit more drama factor to it. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Speaking of petty bullshit, Aster again, remember him? Now I already mentioned my plan with him previously, but basically he's just gonna come in, act like an idiot, and then get eliminated almost immediately because he doesn't hack it. He's just a dude that shows up to basically demonstrate how if you aren't skilled, you're gonna get kicked out of this place. So essentially he's just a jobber. Now in the original, Aster was just kind of thrown in to be a sexist douchebag with no redeeming qualities, and then he gets his foot broken and everyone laughs. Such an amazing character, am I right? So if we're not going to use him, instead of focusing a whole episode on this one random character who serves no purpose in the plot, just get rid of him. But while we're on the topic of sexist douchebags, of course the king of the castle has to be Cal. Hey, fun fact, did you know that Cal is Parnell's cousin? Yeah, that's right, it's said once and never mentioned again. This is hilarious because we never see them interact on screen once. Why the hell did the writers bother making Parnell Cal's cousin if they weren't ever gonna interact with each other on screen? Like, what was the point? Genuinely, the first time I watched this, I missed that line of dialogue, and I had no clue that those two were even related at all. So maybe instead of Parnell just talking about how he gets bullied, have Cal actually bully him on screen so we get some sympathy for Parnell? I think Parnell is already genuinely a likable character, so having Cal come up and bully him on screen would make people hate Cal even more. And it would also make the scene where Snapdragon beats the shit out of him way more satisfying, but whatever. Maybe we could also give Cal a reason for being such a douchebag? Like, anything would help? Now on top of this, there's also the teachers, and most of them are kind of pointless to the plot, so like, I don't even know how to handle them. I think we could probably axe the martial arts teacher, or maybe have him teach something revolving around magic instead. Most of the other teachers' classes would also have to be changed to involve magic, since everyone's going to be a magic user in this version. Since Dretch is a demon, instead of teaching ethics, we could have her teach destruction magic, and instead of Mossflox teaching how to do blacksmithing, maybe he could teach like transmutation or something. Actually, thinking about it more, that last one would be Caraway's domain. Speaking of Caraway, how do we make him better?
That's the neat thing. You don't.
Joking aside, Caraway's interaction with Snapdragon is interesting on paper, but the show doesn't handle it very well, and there's a lot of videos that explain why. I don't think I'm really the kind of person who would know how to improve this dynamic, so you're gonna have to go somewhere else if you want that figured out. But yeah, that's all the teachers covered. No more to go over. Nope, we're done. We don't have to talk about any... Okay, who am I kidding? We all know who's left.
With new magic, you can do anything.
Resisting the urge to just say axe her, the potions teacher is kind of stupid as fuck. She's probably got a higher kill count than most serial killers, and most of those deaths are likely children. So why don't we just treat her like the villain she is? Instead of treating her just like any other teacher, maybe she's actually a villain that the students have to overcome. She's abusing her position and actively hurting other students, and Sage and Rosemary have to try and find a way to get around her. She could be an interesting pseudo-villain early on before Olive gets revealed. Maybe eventually all the students point out how evil she is and she ends up getting kicked out of the school. So long as we aren't glorifying child murderers and treating them like they're just normal people. Like, no, she's a villain, 100%. But yeah, those are basically the changes that I would make to this show to make it at least a little bit better. It may not fix everything, but I think it fixes as much as you can while still keeping the original show intact. But maybe you think there are easier solutions to fixing this show, easier changes that could leave the original more intact and fix as many problems. Well, if so, can you leave a comment below explaining it? I'd love to read those. If these writers refuse to be creative, we're gonna have to do it in their stead. But that's all for now. See you around.